All right. Hello. Today, I think I'm going to check out a couple of different game jams I've been looking at and start planning some prototypes, maybe figure out which one I want to run with for now, and get started in PICO-8. So I have itch.io up here. Hey, Tudo. Let's see. I think I've been joining a lot of jams that I haven't been paying much attention to. Let's make this bigger. Egg Jam 22 starts in 13 hours. This one is for the Eggplant Podcast. The theme of this is nurturing a spark. And I have something that I've been sketching up for that one, but this one doesn't start for another 13 hours. But the idea for that is the narrative is that you are a spark bearer. Let me see where my notes are. It'll be a top-down puzzle game, and your character is what I was calling a spark bearer. Yeah, there we go. Part of a celestial society, have to deliver the spark to the top of a spire, and that is ultimately what creates a star. Then I have some game mechanics written down. Basically, it'd be a top-down puzzle game. You'd have a spark that you're working with to power different electrical puzzles, make your way through moving platforms, doors, some sort of obstacles, maybe an opposing force, spark eaters, or something that's trying to snuff out the spark and stop the creation of a new star. Powered platforms, powered doors, movable blocks, powered movable blocks. And then aesthetically, it would be sort of a lush crystal tower floating in space. So that's the general pitch for that one. That's something that I want to start when the time actually comes around. Another one that I'm looking at is the let's see, where's the other jam? It's the summer slow jams for the Portland Indie Game Squad. It's already been going on for a little bit. That's last year's. There we go. Yeah, this one's only got 5 days left. I probably can't get something together for this. But I had another idea for a top-down kind of roguelike game. This one would be a sort of managing a pirate crew. Maybe I can doodle. So this would have been for this jam. There's no way that I would have time to do it. But the idea is that you would have 3 resources. You'd have like treasure. Make that smaller. You'd have treasure, you'd have your crew, and then you would have rations. So you'd have 3 resources, you'd have a crew of pirates, and you'd be on like a top-down grid, typical roguelike game. This top-down would be like an ocean. You'd have your some sort of representation of a pirate ship. You would have a certain number of crew available to you. So you would have, your crew is essentially your life. And one of the ideas there is that the crew might have different attributes, and there might be a mechanic where you have to arrange the order of the crew. And then anytime you attack an opposing ship, which would be an enemy or any sort of enemy, they would have some sort of crew number as well. And so if their crew number was higher than your crew number, you would deal your crew number damage to them. So they would go down to 2, but then you would also lose a crew a crew member. And so if there were some sort of mechanic where each of these crew members have different attributes, then maybe you always lose the crew member at the bottom. So there's some strategy in rearranging your ship's crew. And so these act as your life, but also as different attributes. So maybe one crew member is like -1 rations. It's hard to type on or write on this. One's -1 rations, or maybe you have a crew member that lets you move 2 spaces each turn. And then your rations, one of your other resources, would be used anytime you're traversing the map. And then I figured somewhere along the route there'd be islands with shops, and at those shops or ports or whatever they are, that's where you could replenish your crew, you could buy rations, and then the treasure you get from defeating enemies. So either you defeat an opposing ship, or maybe there's some sort of like pirate strongholds. I'm thinking very much like Sea of Thieves, the type of things that you encounter in that game. So I've got sort of a smattering of mechanics in mind for this, but nothing really concrete yet. So then another one that's going on that I might throw something together for on this stream is, where did it go? Maybe I didn't join it. Hey, Andre. Oh, actually I missed it. I thought this one was still going for a few days. Oh wait, no, this is May. It's not the right one. Jams in progress. There we go. Yeah, this one's got 5 days left. Pursuing Pixels, James Jam Game Gam. Theme of this one is parallel. I don't know if there's other variants in this. I don't think there is. Yeah, so the theme is parallel. So with this one, I thought I could throw together something quick in PICO-8. This would be maybe just like an infinite runner where you're controlling 2 characters at the same time. And I'm not sure if I would do vertically or horizontally. The gameplay here would be relatively simple. You're just controlling one character on top, one character on bottom, and so they're running in parallel. And they each have obstacles to avoid. And then so you have to have 2 different buttons to jump each character at the same time. The other variation of that would be maybe more of like a, not really a bullet hell, but kind of a more, it would be a little more challenging because you'd have more buttons per character, but I was thinking about splitting the screen vertically and then having, I don't know what the character would be here, but 2 different characters on either side, and similarly you're dodging some sort of threat that's coming at you. Andre Neto reaching out to say thanks for the videos. They helped you create your first PICO-8 game, which allowed you to achieve 2nd place in a game jam last Christmas. Awesome. I'm glad the videos could help you. I've only put out 2. I've got ideas for probably like 5 more, and I haven't sat down to make them. So I'm glad they're helping, and I hope I can take the time to make some more of those soon. If there's anything specific that you're interested in, I'd love to hear what would be helpful for you to learn next. Yeah. So this parallel idea, ultimately, at the core, it's just controlling 2 characters. And then narratively, the goal is that the 2 characters are trying to reach each other. I could do like an infinite score thing. I could actually make it a 2-player game, which would be cool. I don't think I've ever made a 2-player game. I have a PICO-8 arcade cabinet that I built at my house that only has 1 set of controls. So I usually tend to think about PICO-8 games as single-player games. But it'd be nice to make a 2-player thing for once. So if it's going to be 2-player, then I don't know if I would go with the horizontal gameplay. It feels like it'd make more sense to do some sort of vertical split for 2 players if I'm trying to make a game where you're moving in parallel. And the scope creep is already coming in, because now I'm thinking about opportunities where the 2 characters meet. So maybe you move independently through either side for a while, but then at certain points there could be a break. And you come together. I don't know if I'd want to make it a shooter at all. If I make this, I've got 5 days left. So it's got to be relatively simple. I think I just want to throw something together for this jam. So maybe it's just a dodging game, like a side-by-side parallel dodging game. I like games to have an end, just so that there's not a commitment to keep playing, especially with a shorter game like this. And submitting to a game jam, it's nicer for it to have maybe like a 5-minute play time tops, just so that somebody can get the full experience, move on to other jam entries. So maybe it's a maximum of 60 seconds to win, and you have 2 characters that have to move in parallel dodging things to get to the end. And the goal is just for them to meet up. So maybe this image on the right is sort of what the ending is the 2 characters meet up together and fuse to form something. So let's tinker with that in PICO-8. Okay. I'm always so quick to get into the setting. I want to think of what the narrative is and what the artwork is, but I'm going to try and force myself to focus on just making the game. So we'll set up our basic PICO-8 methods here. Need a couple characters. Looking through the ASCII for PICO-8, trying to see if I have something that I would want to use for this. Guess we'll use this one for now. I'm debating if I want to set up my object-oriented programming infrastructure here. I've been trying to avoid it when I'm working directly in PICO-8 just so that I can work with the tools that are common to everyone. Plus it gets a little tedious switching into puny font to type the env variable. So let's try and avoid it for now. We'll just make a function called makePlayer. That's going to return table. And that table will have an x value and a y value to start. Say p1 equals makePlayer, p2 equals makePlayer. Add a draw method. So we'll call p1.draw and p2.draw. We don't have those defined yet, so let's put a draw method here. And we said it's going to be this character for now, so we are going to print that character at self.x, self.y. We'll give it a color also. So say color is 12 by default. And we'll take a couple arguments here. We'll say X, Y, and we'll just do C for color. We can set up some default values, x equals x or 0. Y equals y or 0, c equals c or 12. And then we can just pass those in here. So now in our makePlayer, we'll put this one at 32 and this one at 96. And let's put them both at maybe 96 on the Y. And we won't bother sending a color in for the first player, but the second player will make red. Okay. And then for our play field, we probably want some sort of division. So let's just draw a line at middle of the screen. 64.0 to 64.128. We'll make that gray for now. And let's add an update on each of these. We'll call P1 update and P2 update. We don't have that defined yet. Let's go back over to player. And in our player tab, actually, let's add something here. We don't have a name for this yet, but I'll add the top two comments in your first tab. If I were to make a label image and then save this as .p8.png. Switch views here. And open this folder. Those first two comments, if you can see it here, get written at the bottom of the label image. So there's parallel made by Kevin. So I always try and add those two comments at the top of the first tab when I'm working on a PICO-8 game. Okay, so then in the player tab, and then the comments at the top of any other tab show when you mouse over the tab. So in the player tab, we needed to add an update function. That lets the game run again. We probably want to pass in a player ID. We're going to have two separate sets of controls. We need to know which player we're controlling. So we'll pass in an ID. We'll say ID equals ID or 1. And then here we're passing in a color, and we'll pass in ID 2. That's still working. So then in our update, we need to check our controls. So if btn, see, how do we want to do this? We haven't decided exactly how we're controlling these. I think maybe just left and right and not be able to go up and down, at least for now. I'll say that. What are the numbers? It's 0 through 6. 0 through 6? 1 through 6. I forgot. I think it's 0 through 6. Usually if I'm doing one character, I'll use and I'm building the game in PICO-8, I'll use the ASCII variants. So if you do btn, shift L is for left, shift R is for right, up, down, X, O. But because we want to have two players, I think I need to use numbers. And I think it starts with left. Let's test this. Self.x minus equals 1. Yeah. Okay, but we need to know what our control scheme is. So, let's see. What do we want to call this? Not buttons. Say control. And then we'll make it two tables. And yeah, two tables. And then we're going to say left and right. And then I'm going to look it up real quick. I forget if the numbers just continue after 6 for the second player. Oh, that's right. It's button and then player index. So maybe I don't even need the separate controls. So I can check button 0 for player 0 and then button 0 for player 1. So this might not even be necessary. I want to check, oh, and actually the ID should be 0 and 1 then. So Lua uses 1-based indexes, but there are a few places in PICO-8 where it's 0, base 0, or 0-based index. So by default, player 1 will be index 0 on the buttons, player 2 will be index 1. So then when I'm checking my buttons, I need to check self.id in here. That didn't work. Why not? ID or 0. Defaults to 0. Player 2's D-pad should be S, F, E, and D by default according to the manual. But I am checking button 0 for self.id. Oh, I'm not setting ID. So I was taking it as a parameter to my make player function, I was setting the value here, but I'm not actually passing it in to the table that I return. Yeah, so now I'm only controlling the player that matches that. So actually if I press S, that should move that one. Okay. And so then we need to be able to move right. That's button 1, and we're going to increment our X. Okay, so I can move left and right with that one, and I can move left and right with player 2. On a keyboard, this actually feels backwards. I'm controlling the right player with my left hand and the left player with my right hand. Okay. Now what? So we have 2 players. We'll take a second and set up some game state. So let's make a title. And I'll just make 2 functions, title update and title draw. For anyone just popping in, I'm trying to prototype a little game for this Pursuing Pixels James Jam Game Jam number 3. There's 5 days left on the jam. The theme is parallel. My idea was to make some sort of parallel dodging game. Initially, I thought about maybe an infinite runner with a player on top and a player on bottom. And I think I'm going to move towards something where it's more of a vertical setting with 2 characters that have to dodge oncoming obstacles. And the goal is just to get to the end. It'll be about 60 seconds of gameplay. If you can dodge everything successfully, then the 2 players meet and you win the game. Okay, so I'm setting up game state. When I'm working with object-oriented programming in PICO-8, a lot of the time I will set up a scene object and then I'll have my title scene inherit from that object. In this case, because I want to work a little more quickly, I don't want to have all of that boilerplate in this Game Jam prototype. I'm just going to create update and draw functions for any scenes that I want. And then when I initialize the game, we actually won't create the players here. We will set our update function to title update and our draw function to title draw. And then these are going to change. So then we'll go over here, we'll make it a game scene. And we'll make a game init. So game init will make the 2 players, and then it can be responsible for setting the global update to game update. Actually, I think I'm going to do update 60 on these, make them 60 frames per second. And it'll set the global draw to game draw. And we'll go back to title, actually go back to our main here, and make this one update 60. And maybe, now that I'm thinking about it for consistency, I'll just do a title init. So title init will set those. And then title will eventually call game init. So then all of this stuff is now part of the game. We don't have anything else here. So this update is our game update. And this draw code is our game draw. So then these go away. Okay. So our title isn't doing anything just yet. Clear the screen. And then we'll just print the name. And we'll print it somewhere closer to the middle of the screen. A lot of the games that I work on, I end up having a helpers tab. I like to make a print centered function. And that's going to take text, a Y position, and a color. And then let's see, how do I do this again? It's going to be 64 minus the length of the text string. So you can use a pound sign to get the length of the text string divided by 2. So divided by 2 times 4. .64 is the middle of the screen, and then we want half of the length of the text, and the characters are 4 pixels, or 3 pixels wide, and then 1 pixel of space. And then we can print text at our X value, Y value, and color. So then instead of trying to guess here, we can say print C at 56 pixels white. Yeah, that should be centered. So we can move it up a little bit. And then we can do another thing here. X to start. And then in our update, we can check for that button. I guess, I wonder if we can easily check for either player's X button. We'll just say for now, if button P X, then game init. Yeah. So now when we load it, we get a title screen, which we'll clean up later. We hit X, and then we're in the game. We have 2 different characters that we can move around. One of the other helpers I'm going to need is some sort of collision. And we're going to take 2 objects. We'll put collide on the player. I'm thinking this is going to be a pretty simple game. We're not going to need to check collision on a lot of different things. I'll leave it here for now. And we're going to do axis aligned bounding box, AABB collision. So I need 2 rectangles. So I'm just going to call this R1 and R2. And then I'm just going to reference the code for this because I've done this lots of times. So I need rectangles with an X and Y value and a width and a height, which is W and H. So my player needs a width and a height. And for now, we'll just say that they're 8 by 8. Yeah, this is where I'm doing it. Width is 8, height is 8. And then we need some sort of obstacle. I'm going back and forth on how I'm defining these functions. Sometimes I'm assigning a variable to a function, and other times I'm defining the function directly. It's basically the same thing. I don't know why I'm switching back and forth. So we're going to need obstacles. That's going to return a table. These also need to have an X and a Y value, a width, a height. They will need an update function and a draw function. And then I should take arguments for these. I think I'll make it look like that for now. So we'll print that at x, oops, self.x, self.y, and we'll just make these static gray for now. And as they move, we'll say self.y plus equals 1. That should do nothing to start. Now in game, let's create a timer. Just call it obst timer equals 30. That might be too much. I'm going to have this tick down each frame. So obst timer equals 60. Obst timer minus equals 1. If obst timer is less than or equal to 0, then we are going to make an obstacle. And its x value will be a random value up to 128. Let's actually make it not be right on the edge of the screen. So we'll say it's 8 plus 112. And the y value should always be maybe minus 8. Def or def. You say, I've been using your class code from object-oriented PICO-8 in a new project, and it seemed useful. I'm curious why it looks like you're not using it here. Yeah, I mentioned it a little bit ago. When I'm working directly in PICO-8, I don't really like to use it just because it's a little tedious to always hit Control P and switch into puny font, or stay in puny font and kind of switch up when I'm using capitals and lowercase. If I know it's going to be a bigger project, I'll start with that object-oriented programming structure. In this case, this is a quick prototype. There's a chance that I could go back and start breaking it up into classes. But for now, I'm just kind of tinkering. Yeah, it's just personal preference. I don't expect this to be a very big game for this Game Jam prototype, and so I'm not really going to run into a token limit. I don't think I'm going to have a lot of different functionality here, so it shouldn't be too complicated in things like player, where I'm going to have to reference self a lot. But it's just preference. I don't use it all the time, but if it's a bigger project, I'll definitely reach for that right away. Okay, so in our game, we also need a collection of obstacles. And when we spawn an obstacle, we're going to add it to that collection. And then we're going to reset our timer. And then we need our game update to update all the obstacles. And we need to draw them. These are a lot of little things that I start forgetting. Usually I set this stuff up in my OOP code so that anytime I instantiate an entity, it goes into a pool, and then all of those entities in the pool are automatically updated and drawn each frame. So when I'm not using that, I start forgetting that I need to actually call all these methods. Okay, so now I have obstacles spawning randomly throughout the screen. We're not checking collision on these yet, though. So now I'm thinking of where I want to do that collision check. I could do it in the update of each obstacle. So it just needs to check if it's, maybe I'll have separate pools of obstacles for each player, and then I know which one should check against player 1 and player 2. Or I can do sort of a broad phase check and check which side of the screen that it's on, and then do an axis aligned bounding box check. Or I can probably get away with just checking against both players. Again, because this is a relatively simple game, it's not going to have a lot going on. I don't think I'm going to be pushing the limits of PICO-8. So I can check if collide self, in this case this is the obstacle, so if self collides with P1 or collide self P2, then what do? Now I need a game over state. So this will set our update to game over update, and our draw to game over draw. And then we'll have to decide what to do here. For now, we'll just say we print centered, you lose. Do something nicer eventually. Make it red. Collision check is not working. Oh, we're not doing anything with it. I'm not calling game over init. Game over init. Yep. Okay. So the collision's a little off. It's not very forgiving. But now if a player collides within an 8x8 rectangle of either sprite, then they lose. I shouldn't be able to let them cross over or leave the screen. So let's make some of those changes. So we're letting our players move left and right. Maybe we define bounds here somewhere. So player one, maybe we'll keep them within like 4 pixels of either side. So player one can go from 4 to 64, minus 8 is 56, minus another 4 is 52, if it's an 8x8 character. And the next player should be able to go from 68 to 128 minus 8 minus another 4 is 116. So then let's check here. We'll say self.x equals the mid value of bounds ID plus 1. Let's make this a little bit easier. We'll say local b equals bounds ID plus 1. Because our ID is 0, but an array in PICO-8 or in Lua specifically is going to be starts with index of 1. So a player of ID 0 will use the first set of bounds, which we're calling B here. And then I want the player's X value has to be between B1, its current X value, and B2. Yeah, so now my player can't move outside of its area. And player 2 is also stuck within its area. So then I would probably use those bounds the same way when I'm spawning an obstacle. So maybe I actually want to make this bound should actually be global. So then my game, when I am making an obstacle, we could choose which side it's happening on. So local b equals random bounds. So that's going to pick one of the two tables from the bounds table. So we either get player 1 side or player 2's side. And then our x value is going to be let's see. from 0 up to but not including x. Okay. So I was trying to remember if I could pass a range to the random function in PICO-8, but that doesn't work that way. So I want to get an x position that is b1 plus a random value of b2 minus b1. So that's going to say my x coordinate, because I didn't assign that to anything. My x coordinate is going to have to be between the initial value. So it's saying start at b1. In the case of the first one, that's 4. And then it's 4 plus a random value that is 52 minus 4. So it's 4 plus up to 48. And likewise with player 2. So then that's our x here. So it should pick a random side, and then it'll always spawn within the bounds of that side. That way we don't get the obstacles spawning right on the line in the center. And then using those bounds, I could eventually have it alternate sides. Or maybe I do patterns where one player gets a barrage of shapes and the other player gets a break, and then switch it. Trying to think of what to do next. So I could have patterns. I could try and define patterns so it's not just random spawns. I could start adding some aesthetics to it. I really want to just start working on a theme. I don't know what it would be yet, though. Okay, so just to add some notes here that this is for the Pursuing Pixels Game Jam 3. It's a very long URL. Just add a little more information here. Just adding all of my context here. So again, this is for the Pursuing Pixels Game Jam number 3. There's a URL there. The theme is parallel. The concept is 2 players moving in parallel trying to reconnect. So they can't reconnect. They're separated by the center of the screen. Each player has to dodge obstacles until they reach a point where they reconnect. So what could the setting be for this? I'm debating if it's... Lately I've been on kind of like a space sci-fi kick, so I'm thinking of 2 astronauts stranded in space or something along those lines. But that feels like it's my standard go-to lately for any sort of theme is something in space. So I'm trying to get outside of that. Maybe it doesn't need to be grounded in any sort of reality at all. Maybe it's not people. Trying to think of what would be fun, what would look interesting. Maybe it's some sort of like robots, almost like a Voltron type thing. The 2 entities are just moving through space or moving up into space and then reconnecting. That's kind of cool. I went back to space again, but I still like the idea of like, let's go back to this. So two things. I'm picturing like, I want to come up with something more interesting. It's almost like a superhero. In my head, it's a superhero pose robot kind of flying upward. But I don't want it to be like humanoid. I'd like to have some sort of narrative at the start, why they're trying to get together, what's stopping them. And then as you move up, you end up in space and end up in this sort of scenario here. Maybe it's not a physical barrier. I can make them seem like they're in 2 separate places. Maybe each side is thematically different, and the aesthetic gets similar and more similar as they make it further into the level until they reach a common place. But what would those different places be? Right now I'm just kind of doodling and thinking. I'm picturing what the ending might look like. I'm thinking I want the two shapes to come together to form a heart. I think whatever this heart ends up being, if I do make them form a heart, it'll be sort of a more of a blocky, let's go square brush, more of a blocky kind of representation of a heart that is sort of like a yin and yang of the two colors of the two characters coming together. I don't really like the way that looks though. maybe it's not space. Maybe it's just more abstract altogether. Poking this address in memory is going to allow me to use the extended palette. Then I can define what I want my palette to be. So you can pass the palette command to table, and it starts with the first color, which is typically the dark blue. So it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and then 0. So I could change black, for example, to a dark blue by changing that value to 129. The extended palette, I think you could go negative also, but I don't remember how that math works out. But if you add 128 to the value that you're trying to represent in the additional palette or in the extended palette, so in this case, this color, I don't have that screen up. I can show you in PICO-8. Normally, this is color index 1. So you can see it down in the bottom left. That's color 1. So if I want the darker version of that, it's 128 plus 1. So in this case, I'm saying change what would normally be color 0, black, to the darker blue. And then that orange I pulled from the new palette. It's a little more vibrant, so I think I'm going to change color 9 to the extended palette version of it. So it's 9 plus 128, so 137. We have that brighter orange there. Still can't decide what to make these players. Let's just tinker for a minute. Let's see, maybe in the game we also have particles. I'm going to try and use some consistent function references here. Function make particle. Particle is going to have an X and a Y and a color. It's going to return a table. think I'm always going to give it an X and Y and color, so I'm not going to bother setting these default values. X is X, Y is Y, color is color. A particle is going to have a number of frames. That'll be something else that I need to add into the function signature. It's going to have an update and a draw. I'm debating if particles are going to have a size. So maybe I have a radius. A radius of 0 in PICO-8 is 1 pixel. I'm realizing my particles are probably actually going to need a lot of arguments. X, Y, color, radius, the number of frames. They're going to need a direction, like a speed X and a speed Y, or maybe an angle and a speed. Potentially. I'm thinking I'm picturing in my head like the players have particles kind of falling off of them as they're flying upward. So players will have particles, they'll always move down, but maybe I'll have another use case for particles. I guess I will try not to prematurely optimize that. So then we'll say a particle will always move down. So its self.y is going to plus equal 1 for now. And then self.frames minus equals 1. And then if self.frames is less than or equal to 0, then delete this from the particles table. So maybe say particles equals particle. I'm debating if make particle should actually add to the particles table or if I want to do that in the game. So I set up an empty table here. So when the game starts, particles are empty. And then on player update, add particles, make. And I'll have to put this on a timer eventually so that I'm not just doing it every frame. Make particle, and it's going to be at self.x, let's pull these into new lines, self.x, self.y, plus self.h. So it's always at the bottom of the player sprite. And then, oops, this is not the player. So player will add a particle. Make particle is X, Y, and color. And the color will be a random value. We'll give it a set of, for now we'll just say white or gray. And we're not drawing or updating those. So back in our game, we have our obstacles. We need to do the same thing with our particles. And then we need to iterate over them and draw them. And then the player should actually randomize that x value. So it should be x plus a random value of the width. Let's give player a particle timer. Particle timer minus equals 1. Actually, that should be self. Self.particle timer minus equals 1. If self.particle timer, it's a really long name, is less than or equal to 0, then add the particle. And see, I made max particle timer, doesn't need to be there. That could be something that's just global. Maybe not. Maybe that might be adjustable by particle. So then by player. So self.particle timer equals self.max particle timer. I think I want to make these shorter. Max p time. This will just be p time. So right now it's doing a particle every 30 frames, which is too much. Say every 5 frames. Hey, Mindless Turtle. I am working on something for this Pursuing Pixels James Jam Game Gam. Pursuing Pixels Jam number 3. The theme is parallel. And the idea is a 2-player game where you're moving in parallel. I think for now the idea is just to dodge some sort of objects. And the end goal is for the 2 players to come together. I'm trying to figure out what that's going to look like, what the aesthetic is. I was playing around with this idea of as the players come together, they sort of form a heart in like a yin-yang shape. I don't really know what the setting is just yet, so I'm just kind of hacking away on how the game works. We put together a title screen. We have 2 players that are controlled independently, and there's obstacles moving down the screen. If you collide with one of the obstacles, you lose. There's not really a game over screen just yet. Jump back into PICO-8. Just trying to decide what to work on next and how to improve this. So I was just playing around adding some particle effects while I'm thinking about what to do next. see, I think I want a lerp function here. I'm going to turn off obstacle spawning for a moment. I think I want to give the players a little bit of momentum. So right now they're very rigid. So let's say speed X and speed Y. Actually, we don't have Y right now. We're just moving left and right. So X is going to... X will always equal plus equals speed X self dot SX. If we're pressing the left button, self dot SX plus equal or minus equals. We want to increment by, say 0.1 for now, and self.sx plus equals 0.1. Okay, so I've got a little bit of momentum speeding up and slowing down. Just going to add some debug stuff on the screen. So if I am holding the left button, print left at 4 pixels, 4 pixels. If you surround the arguments of a conditional in PICO-8 with parentheses, you can do it in one line. So now on the screen you can see when I'm pressing the buttons. Okay, so we're adding speed when we're pressing the button, but we need to be slowing down otherwise. Self.sx equals lerp self.sx 0. It's too much. Yeah, so now we kind of slow to a stop. Within a couple of pixels. Okay. There's another effect I have in mind. When you collide with something, I want the game to slow down. So maybe I'll play with that. I've done some tests with something like this, and I was using the variable df for delta frames. So then I need to multiply any values by delta frames. Let's go back to game, re-enable the obstacle timer, so the obstacles should be spawning again. And then in game over update, I want to set delta frames equals lerp. This isn't a great use of lerp, but we can get it. We can get it close. It'll be kind of what we want here. Lerp from the current value of delta frames to 0 by 0.1. Then we need to multiply. We'll start with our obstacle. Our obstacle movement is going to be 1 times delta frame. And actually, while I'm thinking about it, when we start our game, we want to make sure we set delta frames back to 1. So now if we get game over, no, it's a little too fast. Oh, actually, it's fast because it's not doing the updates. Let's make some helper functions for update. I can probably just do update entities. I'm going to want to disable player control when the game over happens. For now, I'm just going to move these updates into update entities. And then I'm also going to have to draw. So we'll make a draw background function and a draw entities function. And we'll bring all that to game over draw. We'll draw the background, draw the entities, draw the players, and then draw the you lose text over that. Yeah, so now it's slowing down. I lose control of the players at that point, and it slows down. The particles should also move by delta frames. I'm debating if once we hit game over, if I don't want the frames to disappear. So I might need to change where I'm doing this. Or sorry, not the frames. I don't want the particles to disappear, so I don't want to decrement their frames when we're in the game over. And I think I want this to change by even less. Yeah, that's better. Okay. So now, playing, you collide, game slows to a stop. Then after a certain amount of time, you'll probably be able to press a button to start over. And it won't say you lose. Whatever the final game ends up being, it'll be something a little more pleasant. Or not. I don't know. Maybe a player explodes. Since I want the game to be about 60 seconds or so to win, I'm debating how to represent that. I could show some sort of progress in that center divider. I could have a timer. I think some sort of indicator in the center might be cool. I might make that center area even wider. Let's see. Probably in the draw entities. Let's do a heart. So we would print a heart at 64 minus a few pixels, so it's let's say 61, and then its Y position is going to be what is the Y position? Between 128 and 0, and then it is going to be 60 minus, or no. I want to start at 120, well, a little bit less than 128. We'll say 123. How tall is this sprite? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we will actually go to, I'll leave 4 pixels on the bottom. I've been doing 4 pixels off of everything else. So that's 124 minus 5 is 119. So 119 to 4. And then as a quick test, I'm trying to base this off of time. So time will count up when we get to 60. I want that to be complete. So it is time divided by 60. Seems like it's moving too fast. I also want that to be red. I feel like it's going too fast. Maybe it's not, and my perception of time is just off. Let's print the value of time So use our print center helper, which I guess we could have used on this too. Print the value of time at the top of the screen. Our helper needs to be able to take a number. So we're going to pass the value, the argument txt. We're going to make sure we cast it to a string and then pass that into our print. Why is it still getting... Oh, because I need to do that before this line. That looks horrible. Let's go back and... Where was I doing that? I did that in the helpers. Maybe 60 seconds is just too fast. It's animating the heart correctly. In my head, 60 seconds seemed like a good amount of time, so I could either make it more difficult and it's 60 seconds, but you're probably going to have to make several attempts. Or if I want it to ramp up, maybe a full playthrough to win is more like 3 minutes, and it starts a little simpler and then starts getting a bit more complicated as the time climbs up. So I'm going to max out the time here at 180 seconds. Yeah, I hear you, Turtle. I do the same thing. Actually, more often than not, I focus too much on effects and aesthetic, and then the gameplay is just kind of a toy more than actually a gaming challenge. And I've started to slip into that a little bit here as well, but I wanted to focus this game jam around making something that's actually enjoyable to play. So that comment sort of recentered me. I think I need to think about the difficulty scaling, not so much particles and visual effects right now. And that heart would have to stop incrementing. I've got about 15 minutes left on this stream anyway. So what should I focus on? See, how would I do difficulty scaling? I could have spawn speeds and amounts based off of bands of time. Trying to think of how I would represent it. So what knobs can we turn right now? The number of obstacles spawning, how fast the obstacles move, the size of the obstacles. I could also affect the player movement speed. I was also debating if players should have a number of lives. So maybe one hit isn't end all be all. I could make the game a little bit longer, have a longer difficulty ramp, but each player gets 3 lives. Player vision is something else to mess with. I'm thinking about there's a game that one of my daughters has been playing a lot on Game Pass. Power-ups, yeah, power-ups is an idea. I don't know if I really want power-ups. Maybe. This game jam ends in 5 days. I probably don't have a lot of time to work on it over those 5 days, so I want to keep the idea relatively simple. I would like it to be a simple but polished 2-player game that represents the jam theme. What I was going to say is one of my daughters has been playing this game called Headbangers, which is like a rhythm game. And one of the mini games, you have to, maybe there's a few of them that do this actually, you have to hit the button at the right time on rhythm, but it ramps up in difficulty by obscuring your view of what you're dodging. Or in my case, it'd be what you're dodging. But in the case of that game, you're trying to hit a button on beat. But the audio fades out, or the visual indicator gets obscured by something else moving across the screen. So what I'm thinking is maybe there's the obstacles moving down the screen. And then there are other dynamic elements that move by. So maybe you have obstacles moving down the screen and something kind of moves past the screen that obscures them where your player is. And so you may have to remember as you see them coming down the screen where those obstacles were while you're momentarily obscured by something moving by. Oh, I'm explaining it in a view that I'm not showing anybody. So this was the example. If those were the obstacles, and then something obscuring the player moving by the screen. So you have your player down the screen, and then something that's going to sort of like move past the players and block their vision as those objectives or obstacles are moving past them. And you might have to remember where to dodge or where your player is. Maybe you have like partial visibility. Or maybe with the aesthetic, something is sort of like moving up from the bottom of the screen, and that's as it gets more complicated, you're having to dodge with little to no vision, or maybe something is sort of like moving intermittently up and down. Yeah, it depends on how challenging I want to make this. Ideally, this is something that I want my kids to be able to play, but I want it to be a challenge for them. "10 minutes is usually my target for how long a game jam should take to play, or like what the full experience is for a game jam entry. So maybe if a win condition takes about 3 minutes of successful play, it's okay to make it more challenging so that you have to make a few attempts, but still within about 10 to 15 minutes, you could see all of the different challenges and be able to potentially overcome them. Shape of obstacles could be another thing. I guess I could doodle in here. So maybe right now I've got obstacles moving down the screen as kind of piecemeal things. Maybe there's a series of obstacles that are more like gates. You have to be in a very specific spot. So you go from being somewhere that there is no obstacle to potentially having to be at a very specific spot on the screen. And then size of obstacles, shape. Yeah, I feel like anytime you're playing game jam games, you don't typically want to spend more than about 10 minutes on one game. If the game's really well polished, then yeah, it'll capture your attention. But when you're just trying to try a bunch of different games, I don't feel like they should be more than about 5 to 10 minutes. As I'm looking at this now, I'm thinking of like a corridor. So there could be a section that's very, very specific pathing. So obstacle size, obstacle speed, frequency, shape, player lives, adjust the difficulty. I don't think I want to mess with the player movement speed. I think I want the control to be consistent. Player vision. Narrow pathways. Okay, so those are some ideas for types of difficulty changes. How do I represent the difficulty? That's what I was working on down here. So maybe I have different functions for obstacle spawning. So this is just sort of like pseudocode spitballing here. So spawn strat equals default spawner and then as the difficulty changes, I could define bands of time. So I could say at 0 seconds, use default spawner. At maybe 15 seconds, we have a challenge spawner. And maybe it's got a little more intelligent logic about which player it's giving challenges to. Maybe the default spawner or intro spawner is just like kind of teaching the player a couple of things move slowly at you. If you run into them, you lose. Same as everything else. So yeah, things move slowly towards you. And then 15 seconds in, you start getting different challenges. Maybe, how long did that last? 30 seconds. So 45 seconds in, you start to get variable spawner. So challenge is a bad name for this. I think I would have to think of something else. I'm just trying to think of what are the chunks of time that you experience throughout this. So you have a very simple set of obstacles initially, and after you kind of get comfortable with that, you start getting more challenges, but they're still basic obstacles. Then about 45 seconds in, you start getting variations. So variable spawner means like different sizes. Maybe they're moving at different speeds. That could be challenging because now you have to gauge if they're going to overlap or if one obstacle is going to move past another and be in your way. So then maybe for a whole minute or so, you're getting different variations. And then that means at about close to the 2-minute mark, maybe I do 30-second bands. 15 seconds of intro, 30 seconds of challenges. And then at 45 seconds, then you go to 105. So you get a full minute of lots of different variations. So then it's a little past halfway at that point. 90 seconds would be halfway. So then maybe at that point, it's like a corridor spawner. And then you start getting things where you have to move through narrow corridors, or maybe it's like short corridors. I'm debating what the final challenge is. So maybe the final challenge is both players having to navigate through a tight space for not a long time, like 15 seconds. So if I'm working backwards, if it's 180 seconds is kind of when the game should end, then the final 15 seconds, so at 165, we get like a long corridor spawner. So you get a spawner that you have to move through the final challenge for 15 seconds. So then I have short corridor here. So that's where you start getting like short challenges where you have to move through narrow pathways, but you get breaks in between. So that's 1 minute right there. Maybe that's what I want, is 1 minute there where the short corridor spawner is like a short, tight corridor and then some other kind of piecemeal obstacles coming at you. And the final challenge is moving through one of those narrow corridors. So I could define it something like this. And then each of these represents a function that determines how to spawn obstacles. And then I just key off of the current time. So once the current time passes any of these values, then I change which function is controlling the obstacle spawning. That's one idea anyway. And if players have lives, I'll have to think of what that means. Because if you get to the long corridor at the end and you still have 3 lives, I wouldn't want you to be able to just brute force through the long corridor. So maybe you don't get lives. Maybe if either player runs into anything, it's game over. But you're able to quickly start back up and play over and over again. Yeah, I feel good about that. It's a start anyway. That is going to wrap it up for me for today, though. I'm at my time. Just to reiterate, in case anyone's catching me right at the end, this was, I took a look at a few different game jams that I am looking at. Let's see, where are we at? Jams joined. Actually, I didn't join this. That's why I couldn't find it earlier. Join that jam. Jams joined. I talked about an idea for the Eggplant podcast game jam that's coming up in 12 hours. So I've got an idea in mind for that. That's earlier in the stream if you want to scroll back and check that out. I had an idea for this resource management slow jam. It's a pirate-themed roguelike where you're managing your crew, rations, and treasure. But I'm not going to be able to throw that together in 5 days, I don't think. I still like the idea of the game, so it might be something that I kind of keep in my back pocket for a future jam. And then the one that we were actually working on this stream is the Pursuing Pixels Game Jam 3 with the theme of parallel. So the gameplay has been working on 2 players moving in parallel. The goal is for them to rejoin each other. And we got 2 separate player controllers going with obstacles spawning. And when you run into something right now, it says you lose. So there's a bit more to go here. I've got 5 days for this jam submission as well. I'm going to continue working on this. Probably post on Twitter and Mastodon with any progress. And it should be wrapped up by next Wednesday. So next Wednesday, I'll probably be working on the eggplant jam with the theme of nurturing a spark. That'll be next week. But thanks everybody for hanging out and for chatting with me while I work on some of these projects. Thanks, Turtle. Appreciate you hanging out and chatting, and appreciate you saying you love the last game. Thanks again, everyone. I am out of here, and I will be streaming again next Wednesday. See ya.